So WALL-E is a thing, and I think it might be Pixar's smartest movie ever. The Toy Story series will always hold a special place for the studio, and I know many people adore Cars. The Monsters universe is ongoing, Inside Out and Up were both instant classics, and the more recent Soul was breathtaking. But there's something about this story of a goofy robot in outer space. All of Pixar's movies have a certain level of quality in animation. Even if that hasn't aged super well, it was amazing for the time. But I think most people agree that Pixar movies hit different because of the way they handle their narrative and themes. And yeah, this isn't the first time that I've talked about a Pixar movie. Despite my ongoing irritation and ire at Disney the corporation, I will be the first to admit that Pixar movies are filled to the brim with some of the smartest storytelling. And you can check out my thoughts on Monsters, Inc. and Marxism, on the nature of thing power and toys in Toy Story, or existentialism in the movie Soul. So with such an amazing catalog of movies, why would I pick WALL-E? I actually saw this one in theaters, but I didn't really think it was all that amazing at the time. That might have had something to do with the fact that I was in the theater looking after a bunch of 6-year-olds, one of whom got stuck in the folding seat facing backwards while standing. Somehow. But I've seen the movie since then, and every time I watch it, I'm blown away. It's still not my favorite. That would probably be a toss-up between The Incredibles and Brave, despite Brave being considered the red-headed stepchild of the Disney princess movies.
Ach, lang me your lumrieke me a moose nearly you'd gone away a teardrop in his eye. Hey, she back, wee lassie?
She's from the other studio.
So why would I choose WALL-E as the greatest? Well, notice that I said smartest, not greatest. And even that is subjective. But WALL-E is absolutely overflowing with thought-provoking ideas and themes. All of them are presented without a single misstep, but at its core, WALL-E is a movie about technology. Not just because it's a science fiction movie, it's so much more than that. This is a movie that presents many ideas through its characters, cultural and historical references, and its stance on environmentalism and consumerism. These are not small ideas in themselves, but they all play an important role in the movie's primary theme, which is the function and goals of technology in society. And so today, I want to talk about WALL-E. Way back in 1994, while the first Toy Story was nearing completion, the creative team at Pixar got together to brainstorm ideas for their next set of projects. This meeting was where the first seeds for Monsters, Inc., A Bug's Life, and Finding Nemo came from, as well as the idea for a movie about a little robot all alone on a planet. Pixar executive Andrew Stanton loved this idea and continued to develop the concept, calling the movie Trash Planet as a working title. Even from the beginning, he knew that he wanted the robot to fall in love, as it made for a great theme for a character to go from lonely and unconnected to having a deep and meaningful relationship. Unfortunately for that little robot, Stanton could not see a way to develop the story any further at the time, and was set to begin co-directing A Bug's Life, so Trash Planet was shelved. Following A Bug's Life, Stanton developed and wrote Monsters Incorporated, and then immediately began work on Finding Nemo as director. In 2002, when Finding Nemo was nearing completion, Stanton found himself thinking about that little robot again. And for the first time in a long time, he actually had some free time to do something about it. He began writing the story and eventually came up with the first version of a movie named WALL-E. Apparently, the first act of the movie has remained largely unchanged, even as the rest of the story underwent dramatic reconstructions. Over the next couple of years, the story was reworked and production began in earnest. The hardest part of the movie's animation process was that the main characters were robots and needed to be designed in relation to their job, but also needed to be appealing to viewers. WALL-E's look is very utilitarian. His tank treads are for traversing the trash landscape, and his legs support shocks for jumping over obstacles. His arms only have a wrist and shoulder because that's all that would be needed to collect garbage into his inner cavity. He was also given the appropriate amount of wear and filth for how long he had been on his own, which also served to give his look more personality. Eve was also designed with function in mind. She is a scouting drone, but was clearly inspired by that pristine, sleek white aesthetic that dominated the 2000s. Both characters have unique silhouettes and color schemes that are instantly recognizable to audiences. The simplicity of their design, even without detail, is what makes them really iconic. They're basically a yellow box and a white egg, respectively. Despite the reduced dialogue, all of the robots in the movie are voiced. Ben Burtt provided the voice for WALL-E and the sound design for the whole film, and Pixar assistant Alyssa Knight was used as a placeholder for Eve before being officially cast. The film was released in 2008, and despite being one of the few Pixar movies to not have a sequel, it was a commercial and critical success, and notably caused some controversy for being denied a nomination for Best Picture. The movie continues to entertain and delight audiences with its endearing characters and astounding animation. Man, nobody does space like Pixar. And let's not forget this movie's incredible dedication to smart storytelling. In order to talk about why the story and themes are so clever, I'm gonna have to get into some details, plus it helps to have a refresher. So if you're unfamiliar with WALL-E, this is your spoiler warning. In the future, Earth has been overrun by garbage and has become an incredibly hostile and inhospitable place with no greenery and chaotic and devastating weather patterns. In the cities, garbage is compacted and piled into towers that dwarf skyscrapers. Even the robots that labored away at these monolithic trash spires have stopped their operations, except for one waste allocation load lifter Earth-class robot, or WALL-E for short. WALL-E spends his days compacting and building towers, but enjoys finding and collecting artifacts. Through some ancient advertising in the form of a video and environmental storytelling, we discover that a megacorporation named By and Large pushed for an evacuation of Earth as a cruise, as a means of leaving the inevitable environmental collapse of Earth while they implemented a plan to clean up all the garbage. Along with his pet cockroach, WALL-E enjoys a simple hermetic life, but clearly longs for companionship. One day, WALL-E finds a unique item that he has never seen before and decides to add it to his collection. Soon afterwards, WALL-E notices a red dot on the ground and proceeds to chase it, like a cat. The dot is part of the landing system for a spaceship which leaves behind a very strange-looking robot. WALL-E is immediately smitten with this visitor, but keeps his distance as it does not seem to be particularly friendly. Look at him, he's like, "Step on me, mommy." Or hover on me? The robot also appears to be frustrated as it's looking for something but cannot seem to find it. Eventually, WALL-E manages to meet the robot and even to communicate with her. She asks for his directive, which we know is trash compacting. This robot turns out to be named Earth Vegetation Evaluator, or Eve.
Eve!
In turn, WALL-E asks for her directive, but she cannot tell him.
Classified.
Before their conversation can go too much further, a sandstorm appears and WALL-E takes Eve back to his home. Ecstatic that he has found another person, WALL-E begins to show Eve all of the cool things that he's found over the years.
Look at this stuff. Isn't it neat? Wouldn't you think my collection's complete?
Most especially, WALL-E shows Eve this video he's been watching in an attempt to get her to understand his need for emotional connection. She is intrigued, but doesn't seem to get the point. WALL-E remembers his newest discovery and shows Eve the green thing, which turns out to be exactly what she was looking for, and she shuts down. WALL-E then spends several days trying to get Eve to re-engage. He spends time with her, protects her, and keeps her safe, but nothing works, so WALL-E returns to trash compacting. Once the ship returns for her, WALL-E is distressed at losing her and races after the ship and stows away on its exterior. This rocket returns to the flagship of the By and Large fleet, the Axiom. Here, Eve is brought to the captain, where we discover that the plant is proof that Earth is once again capable of sustaining life, which means that the humans on board the Axiom can return home. Except the plant isn't there.
Where's the thingy? Plant, right.
And the now awake Eve blames WALL-E.
Plant! Wally!
The captain and his robot autopilot, named Otto, send Eve for repairs, thinking she's broken. And also,
have Wally cleaned.
WALL-E accidentally breaks out all of the defective robots in the repair ward. Eve is frustrated with all of WALL-E's troublemaking, misinterpreting his attempts to try and be with her. The two stumble upon a robot sending the plant into outer space to destroy it, but Eve and WALL-E save the plant and then bring it back to the Axiom, where it turns out that Otto is under orders to keep the Axiom from ever returning home and ordered the plant's destruction. WALL-E is injured trying to keep the plant from Otto and winds up in the garbage disposal. Eve wants to save him, but WALL-E knows that all the parts he needs are on Earth, and in order to get there, they need to save the plant. And so, with the help of the defective robots and some humans, WALL-E, Eve, and the captain get the plant into a port on the ship and begin the return to Earth protocol, where Eve is able to save WALL-E and everyone lives harmoniously on Earth. The story on its own is incredible. There's a clear romance plot, science fiction themes, the overt environmentalism, and of course how all of this relates to technology. All of this is laid out in the opening sequence. Really, the entire first act of this movie should be studied, not just for the way it handles the setup, but the way that it does this with basically no dialogue. This would seem like an absolutely far-fetched decision to make, because WALL-E's our main character and we need to sympathize with him. And because he's a robot, it could be argued that the connection would be even harder because audiences might be less likely to connect to a non-human or non-animal character. But rather than a hurdle to overcome, WALL-E, and to a large extent any of the robots' inability to communicate via spoken word, actually makes them far easier to sympathize with. And a lot of this comes down to the design and artistic choices behind the movie. It's not enough to drag a character through a story and expect the audience to empathize or form an attachment to the character because of the event. You have to make the character affect the story and make those actions evident and endearing to the audience. This is incredibly difficult to do, even with dialogue. A lot of movies and TV suffer from a serious case of real people don't talk that way-itis. So a lot of detail and attention had to be given to how the robots look and express emotion. Eve doesn't have a lot of moving parts to work with, and they didn't want her eyes to be overly expressive and change into something like hearts, which might not have matched her serious personality. So the animators relied on her posture and positioning to accurately portray her mood. If you watch closely, you can see the amazing amount of detail on how she's posed in any given scene or frame. WALL-E was a bit more difficult. He definitely has more moving parts, but because Eve was introduced through WALL-E's point of view, we come to understand her character through his reactions to and with her. But this requires that the viewer already have a sense of who WALL-E is. This is why WALL-E's design is so genius. It's easy to understand his personality. His binocular-like eyes could be used to mimic eyebrows, and the zoom lens could be used to add a layer of emotionality and depth. The combination of these two things give WALL-E the appearance of a wide-eyed child, and do such an amazing job of conveying emotion that a mouth was deemed unnecessary. Most of the robots in the movie don't have an expressive mouth, which is odd because this is one part of the human face where we glean a lot of emotional information from, but the expressive eyes of each robot make them easy to read, or in the case of Otto and the Steward robots who have no eyes, not easy to read, which is fine for them because it supports their place in the narrative. Other than his face, WALL-E's design gives him many points of articulation that allow the animators to shift or move in order to change his body language. WALL-E can cower, tilt his head, slouch, and pose in many more ways that enable his body language to be read in conjunction with his eyes for an added layer of emotionality. Positioning is important in order to understand how a character feels in any given moment, but movement, the connection between pose to pose, can reveal everything about a character and their intentions in a scene. So WALL-E moves. That's not a revolutionary statement, I know. Like most characters, he moves all over the place, and sometimes he really books it. But I'm not talking about movement as just traversal, I'm talking about movement of any kind. Because how a character gets from place to place can tell us a lot about how they're feeling, and how a character moves from pose to pose can denote how emotional or narrative beats are playing out on screen.
Dancing, a series of movements involving two partners, where speed and rhythm match harmoniously with music.
While the movement of any character is important, there's something fundamentally different about WALL-E's movement, and that's because apart from being the main character in a science fiction movie, WALL-E is also the main character in a silent movie. Well, yeah, WALL-E doesn't talk. I thought that was the point, and somehow this was all going to lead back to why technology's portrayal in the movie is important? It is, and I'm gonna get to that, I promise. But when I say WALL-E is a silent movie protagonist, I don't just mean that large swaths of this movie are devoid of dialogue. I mean that WALL-E is inspired by and deliberately imitates the characters of silent films. When Stanton decided that WALL-E was going to be a silent protagonist, he began looking at the way silent films told stories. Since the use of cut-in dialogue scene screens effectively ruined the suspension of disbelief, he and his team looked at the way silent film stars acted, most notably the comedic actors Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton. This had a few effects on WALL-E. First was on the movie itself, as the team studied how the visual mechanics of the film could be used to tell the story beyond just its setting. The way a camera moves, and its position in regards to the characters, what is or is not in frame, the angle and the focus can all be used to explore and explain ideas. The language of film is something that has been developed over time, and even if you're just an average movie watcher, you're probably familiar with the language of cinematography, even if you're not aware of it. But when information cannot be easily fed to audiences via dialogue, directors are forced to focus on other parts of the medium, and WALL-E is a masterclass in this. The first shots of this movie are all of space, hinting that we will be spending more time out there in the vastness, but they also signify this loneliness. We are then brought to one nasty-looking polluted planet and eventually the location of WALL-E. The camera then continually gives us these wide frames. This shows how messed up the city is and the vastness of this desolation and how empty it really is, which iterates on WALL-E's loneliness. A little later, the camera lingers on other shut-down trash units as a means of telling us WALL-E is the last one. So the importance of movement is also connected to the camera, not just the characters. Look at the scene where Eve changes her directive. Notice the way the camera is pointed at her but pans over WALL-E's shoulder to the other shoulder to convey the shift in Eve's thoughts. This is a classic example of camera work that's used to support the narrative. For WALL-E the robot, the influence of Chaplin and Keaton is evident in the way he is choreographed. Movement is the primary way of bringing his personality to life, and often used in place of dialogue. Some of these movements were obvious, like the way WALL-E gives lovesick sighs, but others show different sides of WALL-E's personality. Watch the way WALL-E interacts with his cockroach friend. He's clearly saying stay without using the word. The last effect this had on WALL-E as a character was the decision to turn him into a literal silent movie star. Think about it. Part of what makes WALL-E so entertaining is how funny he is. Large parts of this movie's runtime are occupied with moments of WALL-E engaging in classic slapstick comedy, not to mention his preoccupation with dancing. Slapstick is everywhere in this movie. The entire time he's looking after Eve when she's in hibernation acts as a montage of classic slapstick moments. This isn't just used for comedy, it's also part of WALL-E's goofy personality, and it comes out during a lot of the scenes in this movie. Check this part out where WALL-E's trying to sneak to Eve without Otto or the captain noticing.
It's been restored to a life-sustaining status. By golly, we can begin Operation
How does a robot with tank treads tiptoe? I don't know, but that's what he's doing. It's right there. It's amazing that this physicality is so expressive. WALL-E is literally the modern king of slapstick comedy. This movie is as much a silent movie as it is a science fiction or a romantic comedy. I feel like the use of dialogue has become a bit of a crutch by screenwriters. WALL-E proves it's clearly not a necessity for great writing or for conveying complex ideas. For example, watch the way WALL-E explains to Eve how she can fix him. She doesn't want the plant because WALL-E is her new directive. WALL-E brings the plant back to her because the plant will bring them to Earth, where his spare parts are, like the eye component, which we saw earlier in the film. He explains this through the plant's meaning to Eve, the concept of Earth using the lighter, and then moves his eye unit the same way he did before when he replaced it back on Earth. This is like 4 symbolic ideas all tied together in logical progression with almost no dialogue. That's brilliant, and told to us through movement, posture, and actions. But there is another layer of complexity at work here in order to make sure that something like this is doable. There's a problem with only using cinematography and movement as your storytelling tools. As much as I adore the silent film aspects of this movie and the way they work wonders for the characters in place of conversational interactions, they're not particularly adept at conveying high concept ideas and themes. And this movie is chock full of themes, and we can see these themes come through spectacularly when the humans articulate them.
There you go, little guy. You came a long way for a drink of water. Just need someone to look after you, that's all.
But the humans don't actually show up until almost 40 minutes into this movie, if we don't count the advertisements from the beginning. One of the most obvious themes is the aforementioned environmentalism, and this is fairly easily done through the cinematography. The idea of consumerism is also present in the way By and Large is presented as a mega corporation. Their logo is on everything and everywhere. Even WALL-E's loneliness is told to us through camera shots, as I explained before, but these are all supported by what I think might have been Andrew Stanton's smartest idea, as well as his craziest. The fact that he wanted to direct a mostly silent movie was already pretty out there, but his next move was even more ludicrous. Stanton chose to explore the theme of love through a cultural reference, specifically by tying the idea of hand-holding to the classical musical Hello, Dolly. Dolly. Hand-holding is a good first step, as it is a simple action that any person or people can replicate, but it could mean a few different things. When WALL-E is watching Hello, Dolly, 2 songs play. Put on your Sunday clothes, and it only takes a moment. In the latter, we see the characters Cornelius and Irene hold hands. WALL-E observes this, and we infer the meaning of this action as one of connection, romantic or otherwise, and WALL-E's longing for it. The beauty of this is that you don't even have to be familiar with Hello, Dolly. I did not know this musical when I first saw WALL-E, and I doubt most children would be aware of it either. But the song has all the tropes of a classical musical duet about love, so the cultural reference is easily discernible, and if you're familiar, the historical context adds to the meaning. These 2 songs then become a kind of theme for WALL-E, both the movie and the character. They come up repeatedly over the course of the movie as he has them recorded. It's one of the things that he is most excited to show Eve, and here we can understand that his motivation to be with Eve is more than just hand-holding. It's the implication of connecting to another being. This idea of connection is not a super easy thing to communicate, but with the help of the musical and visual reference, it's clearly reinforced throughout the opening act, and the act of hand-holding and the songs used throughout the movie are a means of bringing the theme back up. And like most good themes, this evolves through the course of the film. WALL-E interacts with many different people, and we see John and Mary first connect by holding hands later in the film. Eve uses one of the songs to try and get WALL-E to interact with her. One of the robots helping WALL-E even uses a mimicked version of Put on Your Sunday Clothes to communicate their understanding of WALL-E's goal and their willingness to help. Put on Your Sunday Clothes is actually played over the opening space sequence, which adds a layer of double meaning to the lyrics. It's a great way to foreshadow the use of Hello, Dolly in the narrative, and a fun and jaunty American musical aesthetic is used as a comedic contrast to the derelict nature of planet Earth. It sets the tone for the whole film. I love the inclusion of Hello, Dolly, and not just because I love musicals, but because its inclusion adds to the narrative and helps perpetuate the movie's themes. And while it's the most overt cultural reference, it's not the only one. There are some brilliant references to other science fiction movies in WALL-E. The most obvious one is Otto's design and characterization as a direct reference to Hal from 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is underlined by the piece of music Also Sprach Zarathustra by Richard Strauss when the captain makes his literal stand against Otto. We also hear a few other musical pieces that were used in 2001 throughout the movie as well. Sigourney Weaver, who famously portrayed Ellen Ripley in the Alien movies, is the Axiom's voice, giving a perfect rendition of the sci-fi female computer. There are a bunch of other references too, so if you spot one, point it out in the comments. But in solving the problem of communicating these themes succinctly without traditional dialogue, the inclusion of Hello Dolly caused another problem, one that might have ruined the suspension of disbelief in audiences. While Hello Dolly is a wonderful musical and thematic addition to the movie, an actual scene appears in WALL-E. This may have caused major issues, which had nothing to do with the fact that Hello Dolly was owned by 20th Century Fox, which I guess is Disney now anyway. The real issue is that the scene is live action, and when placed inside an animated movie, this could have been a bit jarring. This may not have been a huge problem if the movie never had any other humans in it, but as we know, there are a large number of humans later on in the film, and they're all animated. If you've seen the movie, and I'm willing to bet you have if you're this far into the video, then you know that it's not really that jarring at all, and this is for a few reasons. The first is that the Hello Dolly scene is offset by another live action sequence earlier in the film. It's the advertisement from By and Large. This acts not only as a means of exposition and setup, it also integrates live-action actors into the world so we're prepared for Hello Dolly. Interestingly, it became an artistic choice for all of the footage. Any archived footage of the past, both real and in-world created for the movie, are all live-action clips. WALL-E could exist in an alternate universe to ours, where instead of shows being animated and people being live action, the real world is animated and shows are live action. Think about it. All of the live action footage shown is via screen of some kind, never in flashback. And that's not because I actually think they're in a parallel animated universe, although that is fun to think about, but because it's another way of separating and justifying the use of live action without ruining the suspension of disbelief. The By and Large live action segments also have been touched up digitally to make the humans look a bit cartoony as well. It's a subtle addition to integrate them further into the movie, but it works. It makes the inclusion of live action less jarring, which is essential for Hello Dolly to work, but they also help introduce two important themes. The use of advertisements throughout WALL-E is blatant. Once again, the first few minutes of this movie show off the subtlety of silent storytelling with the marketing of By and Large everywhere. Their store sizes, color scheme, billboard advertising techniques, and the clear takeover of essential services all play into the idea of capitalistic consumerism. They even have their own terrible jingle. It's not hard to see that this kind of profit-first mentality would cause massive long-term environmental issues. In the real world, we're dealing with a huge amount of waste destroying ecosystems. We tend to use an out-of-sight, out-of-mind mentality. The use of trash is a clever move because it requires only a visual depiction to get the point across, but the parallel of real-world global climate change is obvious. While WALL-E is cleaning all this up, we can see him relocate the trash, but it doesn't disappear. We can also see the effect the ravaged planet has on him. WALL-E being solar-powered seems to be a bit of an oversight too, as I assume a planet prone to unpredictable weather patterns could also be covered in clouds for long periods of time. That's just poor planning. But of course, foresight was probably not the goal when By and Large created the WALL-E robots. WALL-E is also clever about how it points the finger of blame. It's clear that By and Large is the big bad corporation that's responsible for the massive issues on Earth, and that it isn't because of the way an individual creates trash or pollutes. This is in fact the fault of large corporations, but the responsibility for the planet and the way we allow corporations to get away with these kinds of tactics, and the fact that we buy into this consumerist mentality, is definitely the individual's fault. And that's clear in WALL-E. The movie spends a lot of time trying to show the audience how apathetic humans have become. They're complacent, and this leads to a lot of issues. If it's easy and cheap to do, then who cares about the consequences? And on the Axiom, nothing has changed. They still have a massive amount of trash that they release into outer space. Sure, it causes less pollution on the Axiom itself, but the fact of the matter is that humans haven't changed their habits, even though the whole reason that they're on the ship was because of these negligent and apathetic practices. That's why the captain's statement is so profound.
Just need someone to look after you, that's all.
Instead of choosing to protect and save the planet, the humans chose the easy way out, and now they have to make things right even though it might be the hardest thing they've ever done. This is an excellent theme and presented beautifully throughout the film, but I don't think it's the main theme of the movie. I think there's something larger that this plays into, and that's the way WALL-E depicts technology. WALL-E might be a silent movie, and a comedy, definitely a romance, and a criticism of consumerism, but I think it's pretty safe to say that WALL-E is also a science fiction movie. The references to other science fiction media are done to make connections to the genre in the eyes of the audience. A lot of science fiction depicts humans as the main characters with futuristic technology around them that they must contend with, which creates neat philosophical problems like cloning or robots and the nature of identity or what it means to be human. But WALL-E's two main characters are both robots and distinctly non-human. As a robot main character that does not look human, it was important for WALL-E to be sympathetic, and that's why the design, movement, themes, music, and cultural reference are so important. Audiences need to sympathize with WALL-E, not just to have a likable hero, but so that we can relate to him as a character that is distinctly non-human. The consumerist and environmentalist criticisms were then presented to us through WALL-E's interactions, but because he himself is technology and not human, there's a huge difference in how to read these themes. One that would not be there if the movie was strictly about humans. Humans are still here, but the robots are far more prominent and narratively important. But what is technology? I'm sure you have a vague idea of what I'm talking about, but what the fuck am I actually referring to? Well, according to German philosopher Herbert Marcuse, technology is the system made up of all the different pieces of machinery, computers, and advanced tools that we have at any given time. Marcuse viewed technology as a social process. We tend to think of technology as things like phones and satellites, which define our current world, but there was a time where a shovel was the forefront of technological advancement. These objects are individual units that make up a system that we refer to broadly as technology. In his book, One-Dimensional Man, Marcuse argues that technology could be used to create new systems of control by blurring the lines between false needs and true needs. True needs are the kinds of things that we need to survive, and Marcuse thinks that if technology can help us get access to these things, that's awesome. But he warns us against the way technology can be used to create false needs, things that we do not need to survive, but through the use of technology can be given the illusion of necessity. This can then be used to control what people think they need or want and limit thoughts down to one-dimensional thinking.
Try blue. It's the new red.
Ooh. Marcuse isn't trying to say that people are stupid, but that we can be controlled through the use of technology. And we can see the same thing in WALL-E. The captain, John, and Mary are all disengaged because of technology, but they're not stupid people. They just don't notice the world around them because they're busy in their one-dimensional thoughts.
I didn't know we had a pool.
The appeal of relying on technology is sinister. It creeps up on you. The purpose of technology is that it should make access to needs easier, but this can then creep into reliance until a false need feels like a true need. The hover chairs are introduced at the beginning as a means of helping those with accessibility issues, but by the time WALL-E gets to the axiom, everyone is using a hover chair despite the fact that we know they can walk, and if they fall, a robot will help them back up. This is apparent not just in the way we use and rely on technology either. Technology is a whole network, and so it is actually integrated into the entire way we function as a society. Marcuse warns about becoming reliant on technology as it's a means of control. Strictly speaking, Marcuse does not think technology is neutral though. It's not a case of using it for good and not for evil, because technology was created with a purpose by a system that is inherently biased. So food in a cup might be a cheap and easy way, but it will always be wasteful for the humans on the axiom because it was designed that way. And we can see how the technological process and the needs it perpetuates are fed to the next generation as technology becomes the tools for education and pushes the same modes of thought onto children.
B is for by and large, your very best friend.
That is a literal piece of technology pushing corporate technological propaganda. The way by and large developed into the capitalistic wasteful corporation we see it as was caused by technology that allowed for the fabrication and distribution of high waste products. The way things are advertised on Earth and on the axiom are both brought to people by technology and created with the technological means of the day. Future technology will be created by current technology. That means that future machines, robots, and tools will be extensions of the current system. So if the technology of the past was one that perpetuated waste, which we see in the advertising in WALL-E's opening, then it's not a surprise that the axiom hasn't changed at all. Even though the technology has advanced, it was created by the technology of the past, which was designed to be capitalistic. So the problem persists. By and large, literally made a profit selling people a cruise to escape an environmental disaster they created while making a profit. And then they probably made more profit by selling people on the idea of them cleaning up Earth and the creation of their WALL-E robots, which explains the solar panels, and why they didn't realize the ecological collapse of the planet was worse than they thought, because there was no long-term projection. They didn't want to see it because the technology of the past created the technology of the present, which affects the technology of the future, and this was all based on a short-term profit mentality. And it appears that no one held them accountable, because the CEO of By and Large, Shelby Forthright, is also a de facto government official. If the technology promotes profit above all else, this then creates a false need for that profit. This becomes lauded. Therefore, Shelby became powerful enough to either be the government or was voted in anyway. This sounds familiar. If technological advancement is created and developed by the same system, then it's no wonder that Otto is the actual governing system in the axiom. He is a literal piece of technology that is brought about by the social process of a technological system before him. But it's not all doom and gloom for Marcuse. His idea of a technological system of power implies there could be an alternate technology created outside society. Enter Wall-E himself. Wall-E was created by and Large, but he's been on his own for approximately 700 years. In that time, he was not under any kind of pressure from any technological or social systems, including the ones that created him. We see he starts developing some strange quirks, like collecting objects and watching old movies. This shows that Wall-E now exists outside any technological or social system because he's a weird techno-hermit. As the movie brings us to the axiom, Wall-E interacts with more and more humans and robots, and they start to question their outlook on the world, most notably in John and Mary. There are other robots on the axiom that do not fit into the norm, because robots in this universe have personalities, some of them bigger than others. We can infer that they might still be stuck in the technological system of their making, but are autonomous beings and therefore wish for freedom. We first meet these robots in the repair ward, but it's clear that when Wall-E breaks them out, they didn't want to be there, and they get labeled as
Rogue robots.
Which makes sense. They're functioning in a way that is against the utility they were created for, and therefore do not fit into the technological system. So the system, personified by the ship's voice, brands them as broken or outsiders. Otto represents the technological system in character form. He is incapable of letting go of the past because technology is defined by its past. He does everything in his power to eliminate opposing worldviews because that literally means his downfall.
Must follow my directive.
Two systems of technology cannot coexist because their primary function will always be in conflict. But Wall-E's interactions inspire people to look at things in a very different way. Eve wanted to find the plant, but because it was her directive, not because she was interested in change, or going back to Earth. It isn't until she sees how Wall-E acts towards her, in a way that is outside the technological system that she is used to, that she changes her mind. Wall-E the robot could be seen as a representation of an outside system of technological thought, spreading an ideological change in the way people choose to not just interact with technology, but also how they want technology to act as a system. And we see the outcome of this in the dope ending credits animation, which really could be studied as a short film on its own. Also, who doesn't love Peter Gabriel? In this animation, we see the people, both human and robot, working together to protect and rehabilitate the planet. The humans are still working with the robots, but there's much more equality in the relationship, and it's clear that the system has changed by the way people interact with technology. Slowly but surely, Wall-E changed the axiom, which is poetic because axiom is a word that means an underlying rule that is taken to be true. And in this case, Wall-E shows that the things people took to be true were in fact false and needed to be reevaluated. The depiction of science fiction with a focus on how technology is a social system that controls the collective consciousness is probably not what you think of when I mention the movie Wall-E, but I don't think it's a stretch. The movie is a favorite amongst watchers because of its clever themes, and I think its exploration of technology is chief amongst them. It's why Wall-E's design, movement, and personality are so important. We need to sympathize with him so we can see the changes he causes in technological thought. And we get this through the use of higher thematic concepts represented by hand-holding and Hello Dolly. We see Wall-E fight back against loneliness by connecting with people, which changes the way they think about the systems that hold power and why they are in power. Wall-E is curious and thoughtful, and because he's an outsider, his understanding of societal technological systems is basically non-existent. He begins to pose questions about the efficacy of the system of power by simply showing that there are other ways to connect to people. This causes both the robots and humans around him to change their interactions with technology. The rogue and broken robots accept themselves for being what they are rather than designed for a singular function. Eve changes her entire purpose, which was given to her by that system, all because Wall-E changes people's minds about their relationship to technology. All of this is done with gorgeous animation, spectacular music, and wonderful heartfelt characters. And that is why Wall-E is the smartest Pixar movie. Here are my stray thoughts. I used he for Wall-E and Otto and she for Eve, even though they're robots and don't really have a specified gender, but I think it's pretty clear that they're coded that way for Western audiences. I mentioned the language of cinematography as something we pick up on, but I was referring to Western visual mediums as other cultures have their own cinematic language. I didn't really get a chance to talk about Thomas Newman's outstanding score because the video was already stupidly long, but this is my favorite one of his film work. That dancing scene is unbelievable. And nobody does space like Pixar. Hey, thanks so much for watching that episode. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button like you're scrubbing off some foreign contaminant. That was a lot of words that I had to write, but it was a lot of fun, and One Dimensional Man by Herbert Marcuse is an amazing book, so check that one out if you like. This episode sort of touched on some more Marxist criticism of capitalism, so if you want to hear more about that, check out the Monsters, Inc. or Severance videos that I did, and there's a whole playlist. And subscribe so you'll never miss another video that I got. That's all happening right here on Cinemasters Ultimate Timeline.